Yeah, hello to everyone all over the world. We've got some great different places here that people are coming from. But as I said, I'm going to get us started. I know people are still filtering into the room, but I'll just do the preamble so we can get to our speakers and hopefully have some really exciting conversation at the end because that's what you're all here for. So, welcome to the first of our series of webinars on decolonizing death studies. This particular session is called Death Rituals Woven with Colonialism, Law, and the Media. And I'm here to host you today. So my name is Dr. Stacey Pitsillides, and I'm Associate Professor in the School of Design, Arts and Creative Industries at Northumbria University, and also one of the co-editors of the book Decolonizing Death Studies. So yeah, we want to first really thank you all for coming together with us to celebrate the publication of this book. This webinar series and the other two that are coming are stemming out of this project for us, which has been a real passion project for myself, Baniotis, and Hajar for the last couple of years, and really a little bit longer than that as well, as part of working with the Association for Death and Society, working with the ASDS ambassadors, and really believing in this idea of death studies needing to open outwards into the world, needing to find different points of inspiration, opening different voices into our community, and really going beyond what has been at times a quite traditional subject area, albeit one that's incredibly interdisciplinary. So we wanted this book to really explore a wide range of perspectives, from rituals to repatriations, from the politics of remembrance to the Anthropocene, and also bringing in queer and trans experiences of loss. So bringing that kind of opening outwards that decolonizing death studies and queering death studies into conversation with each other. And we want to bring you all together with us as a community to collectively examine how death reflects culture, power, and resistance across the world. And I think we'll all agree that in this day and age, in this time, we really need that, and it's really important. So yeah, we want to collaborate, promote interdisciplinary, and break new ground by bringing together a diverse range of perspectives and voices, coming together today to foster rich dialogue and promote inclusivity. And the book is divided into 4 sections, as you can see above: death rituals and cultural identity, mediations, representations and colonial echoes, necropolitics, marginalization and resistance, reworlding myth and community. And this series is divided into 3 webinars, showcasing 9 different chapters. So they give you a real taste of the book without having to have read the book. Obviously, it would be great if you do read the book, but this gives you a real insight into the types of things that we're thinking about. And the second one in the series is Meaning Making Death Politics in Post-Colonial Spaces, and it'll be chaired by Hajar Gobani. And the third one is Mapping Deathways Environmentally, Digitally, and Through Repatriation Scapes, which will be chaired by Vaniotis Bendaris. So yeah, we're really excited about the next 2 that are coming up too. But obviously, today's session we've got some amazing authors here with you, and we also wanted to say a very special thank you to ASDS for both hosting this webinar series and for also sharing the recording afterwards. And also we have an idea that hopefully we can achieve, that at each webinar we'll do a raffle which someone will be able to win a free copy of the book. So I'm not quite sure how we're going to do that yet. We've got 33 people on the call. It might be a case of assigning a dice roll to 1 to 33. But I'm hoping we can figure that out. Otherwise, we'll do it post call and we'll send an email to the person who wins. But yeah. So we've got an amazing program for you today. We've got 4 different speakers, 3 chapters, 4 speakers talking about different perspectives of the book. So we've got Averil Martin talking about the Maori cremation and colonialization, conceptions of identity of the cremated dead. We've got Giorgio Scalici. Sorry if I get your name wrong, I really apologize. Exploring funeral law, migration, and religious expression in Italy, a decolonial perspective. And we've got chapter 5, Death and Colonial Hangover in the Vampire Diaries, with Sanghita Dey and Agnidh Baruah collectively presenting that chapter. And you can see a little bit of their bios on the screen, but do feel free as authors to introduce yourselves as well. So yeah, thank you all for being here, and I'm going to take this opportunity to stop sharing and to also pass on to the first speaker in this series, which is Averil Martin.
Okay, I'll just grab my slides.
Allá también puede. Lo ponemos en stream.
Okay, so you can see, hopefully.
Yes, we can. So one last bit of housekeeping. We're going to have each presentation, which will be about 15 minutes long, and then we'll have a chance for a live Q&A at the end, which we'll take questions at the end rather than in between the presentations. Brilliant. Yeah, take it away, Avril. Thank you.
No worries. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Aotea, nā toke mata whaura mā mari te waka. Ko whakarongaroa te maunga o te kore te awa, ngā puhi te iwi, te hone hone te marae, te urupāpuka tawa.
Sí,
Ko
pero
meha
pensé que lo podíamos poner allá.
Ko
Pensé.
he mea te oro taku koro, ko ngā pika te oro taku whaia, ko Peter Eddowes taku papa, ko Avril Martin ahau. Tēnā koutou, tēnā
Pero
tātou.
estaba pensando cómo ponerlo ahí, ¿no? Para que lo podamos oír desde ahí.
So, hello everybody, I'm Averil Martin.
Sí.
You have just listened to
El bafle lo sacamos cuando el señor llegue.
a pepeha. I'm not sure, is anybody else also hearing another?
Yes, please, if anyone's not on mute, can you mute, please?
¿Usted sintió?
Good.
Pero no sé cómo debería ser. Común y correcto. Phone.
Maybe? We're good?
Yeah, I think I found it.
Oh, good. So, hello everybody, I'm Avril Martin. What you've just listened to is a pepeha. I'm Māori, so Indigenous people of New Zealand, and what this does is it locates me within a geographic, cultural, and a family context. Culturally, what it does is qualify me to my own people first, and then to other Indigenous people, and then all other people that are sitting within this room. And academically, what it does is it establishes my perspective as probably a little different to everybody else's. The effect is similar for me because of what I research. So I look at cremated remains and more specifically the ontology, practices and identities associated with cremated remains. I live in the Gold Coast of Australia. At the moment, we're probably sitting at about maybe 28, 30 degrees, and it's 6 p.m. at night, 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. So it gets pretty hot and steamy here. In Australia, in about 2021, the census estimated about 65% of all deaths in Australia are going to end in cremation. And that's increasing as funeral costs increase, so is the estimated amount of cremation that happens. And it is an estimate because they don't know for certain. So in Australia, about 200,000 Māori people live in Australia, which is about 20% of the total population of Māori in the world. And as more people choose that cremation, more and more Māori are also cremating. And the more the funeral industry itself needs to have information about how to handle multicultural deaths and disposition. And they do pretty well, but the information that's out there is very different to and related more to bodies than it is to cremated remains. So why am I asking you to care? Well, I'm asking a lot of people to care because how people conceive of ashes really affects how they're treated, and it really determines who establishes those death practices. So in the beginning, I started this research from a friend of mine. Our girls went to preschool together, and her and I were on a committee together, and we knew one another well. We knew our families pretty well, and she had a cousin here in Australia who had a Australian wife, and three young children, and he became terminally unwell in Australia. So she and her husband were overseas at the time and had made arrangements to return home to New Zealand, take care of their family first, and then come to Australia to see him before he died, and then ask his wife for his body and return his body back to New Zealand, where he would have a funeral. So in New Zealand, we call them tangis, and bury him. So they were Mormon, and there are religious practices that have to happen within a time frame, and it is normal for bodies for Māori to go back home and to be buried. So there were protocols that needed to be followed. So when they landed back in New Zealand, they contacted his wife to determine when they should go to Australia, when they should come. And they found out on that phone call that he had actually died and that she had already cremated him. And they got really upset at that. They got really upset by the idea that he had been cremated at all because they were expecting a burial. And then his wife poured his ashes into a courier bag and sent him home, which made them even angrier. They were completely incensed by this idea that he was sent home like a parcel, not a person. So culturally, there's this mistreatment of his remains, and it was shocking for his family, and it made them really angry. And literally, when I heard this story, I thought that she was joking. And I laughed at her and I said, "You got to be kidding, right?" And she said to me, "No, no, I'm not." And a few things happened in my brain, and I just stopped dead in my tracks and I went, surely we can do something better than that. And I started to poke at the problem then, about 15 years ago, and to understand why it was so shocking and why that required understanding and what constituted a person, and then why did they, when were they considered deceased, that kind of stuff. And what I discovered in New Zealand was that we actually had very little legislation that stopped any type of cremation occurring at all anywhere. So I started a process back then that's very similar to what my colleague Giorgio was actually promoting in his chapter, where I asked the New Zealand Law Commission to review a first principles review of New Zealand Death Act, which they've done since. It's taken about 10 years to knock that through, so it is a really interesting case study to look at. So, there's a few things that went on for this. Was he a person or was he a parcel? Was one of the things that I started to look at. That there's this misalignment between culture and expected outcomes. Why were they different? And the biggest thing, and what this is mostly concerned about in my chapter, is what actually constitutes a person. And it's quite different to what most other people probably consider. So with modern personhood in Māoridom, there's three elements. So tinana, which is this idea of corporeal remains. So you have bones and flesh and organs that are put together, and you have wairua. So wairua is the spirit. This is where the personality, soul, and identity as ancestor resides in modern Māori thinking. And then you have mauri. So mauri is a different thing again, which is this life force. It's the beginning of life, the energy, the animation. And it's the thing that tells you apart. So a lot of things will have animation, but mauri is the thing that tells you apart from an object. So we have this interesting thing that happens, and te Pāpaku is the term that we use in Māoridom, and it's a Māori term that describes people who are dying and the deceased. So you change a status from person into te Pāpaku until you become deceased. But for us, deceased is a matter of timing, and we're going to come back round to that. So when you read about Māori deaths or funerary customs, what tends to happen is it's usually about burial. And the contemporary elements that make it up of a te Pāpaku are these three elements. And the understanding comes from the impact of British colonialism and death practices that were older and more nuanced were actually more valuable for what I was thinking about. So when you look at this, you pretty much have body and soul, which has something that has come mostly through Christianity itself, which is interesting. So we're going to take you back a step further. So there are much earlier publications that are rare and hard to come across and really hard to find. And there were a few that come to mind. So Henare is one of the earlier publications, and then there were letters of very early anthropologists who were both Māori and were documenting Māori histories at the turn of the century when colonialism was actually happening in New Zealand. And they contain discussion of people having 5 constitutional elements, not 3. So you have this idea of tinana, which is your corporeal remains, that remained the same. So we have flesh and you have organs. And then you have ko'iwi. So ko'iwi is this idea of skeletal remains. And the identity of ancestor sat with ko'iwi, not necessarily with Wairua as it does now. And then Wairua is still sits there. It holds the personality, it holds the soul. Maori is still there as well as life force and the beginning of life and for animation. But there's this other element that was also there called Ho, which is a cosmic force, and it's about vitality and the breath of life principle. So when an embryo is formed, this is when you would get Maori and life force. But Ho is something that also goes with Maori, because you wouldn't have an embryo if the vitality wasn't there for it to survive. So you have these 2 concepts that sit together. And these things distinguish the living from the non-living things, and it's both physical and spiritual realms that sit in between. So you have a few elements that go in. So what changed was the contemporary Māori understanding of personhood was affected by Christianity, and Māori adapted until we actually forgot that these components existed. Ho was incorporated into Māori, which fits with a medicalised death term. So you get whole bodies, so you have your ko'iwi and your tinana, they all go together as one piece. And ko'iwi was incorporated into tinana, which also fits this Christian concept of body and soul. For me, the interesting bit was the identity of ancestor, because it shifted. It shifted from the bones to the soul, and I was kind of curious about why would that happen? How did that happen? Because it has implications for ashes, particularly, and association identity with ko'iwi dropped out of cultural memory. So when I asked Māori people about what ashes were, they weren't 100% sure, to be fair. They described them as ko'iwi without actually having the understanding of the earlier term of what ko'iwi actually meant, of skeletal remains. So it was an interesting exercise. So then it came down to a matter of, so we kind of know what the elements are, but when does somebody actually die? So in the Māori worldview of death, ceasing to breathe doesn't actually mean that you're deceased. Most concepts of death are around a medicalized view of that, where if you cease breathing, if you cease brain function, that kind of thing, then you are considered deceased. But for a Māori worldview, that's not necessarily accurate. So a person will change status to Te Pāpaku once they've become terminally unwell, and they retain that status until all elements of personhood are dispatched. So elements must be dispatched through tangihanga, which are funeral rites, and they can last, it depends on how important the person is, but generally they're around 3 days. But they used to last up to like 3 or 4 weeks. So they would hold a body on a marae for up to 3 weeks, while people came to visit and pay respects as what it would be considered now, and probably in when you look at that as a Christian view or as a westernized view, then it's paying respects. But for us, it's not that. It is actually visiting the person themselves to say your piece. So here, Wairua, the personality, the soul, during tangihanga is actually encouraged to leave. And they're encouraged to make their way to Hawaii Nui. Now, Hawaii Nui is it's a place. It's a traditional place where all spirits go, and it's the land of the spirits, is the easiest way that I can describe it. Because having their ghost linger is not necessarily a good thing for the living, at least. And it means that the ghosts themselves have unfinished business, and that can create difficulties for the living. And there's all sorts of associations with that. Tinana, Māori, and Ho, they are returned to the earth and the cosmos, usually through burial in land, which ensures that disposition and passage to Te Rerenga Wairua. Te Rerenga Wairua is a pōhutukawa tree, so it's a type of tree, and it grows in the very, very far north, furthest northern tip that you can get of New Zealand. And it's where the spirits follow the roots down into the sea and then into Hawaii Nui. That's how our death stories go. Now, Kōiwi is what remains and is honoured and cared for as representations of ancestors. And it's a very earthly link of the deceased into the spirit world. When I try and describe this for younger people, so like people under the age of 30, the easiest way I can describe it for them is kōiwi becomes like a mobile phone to the other world, where you can talk to the deceased, or you can call on the deceased to ask for favors or to ask for goodwill. If you have the bones, but the bones can also be used as a protection mechanism, and it relies on a lot of superstition for Māori that if you have bones, then you just don't mess with them because you don't know who they are, you don't know where they've been, you don't know how much bad luck that's going to bring to you. But there are more modern disposition techniques that upset the balance of death and when that actually occurs. For example, direct cremation. So if you directly cremate somebody, the tangi itself doesn't occur. So the wairua isn't encouraged to leave. So if the wairua is still attached, can you consider them deceased at all? Which is an interesting thought. Even for Māori, that's a very interesting thought. So if the soul hasn't left, do you condemn the soul to wander the earth forever because you haven't done a tangi? And if kōiwi are the only remains that are left, does the wairua stay with them? And we're not actually certain how that functions anymore. And as more and more and more people pay more and more and more for funerals, the more likely they are to ask for direct cremation because they just can't afford the funeral costs. So then how do we manage those things as a culture when it's been removed? It was deliberately squashed, for want of a better word, by legislation, by suppression of cultural practices. So it's quite interesting how that works. There's also things like alkaline hydrolysis, where tinana is returned to water or flushed onto land. Both of those challenging Māori connections to water and whenua. Sorry.
You're just running a bit over, Averil. Are you nearly
Oh,
okay?
I'm so sorry. I can't hear
Oh,
the
sorry.
alarm.
Sorry, I had it on before. That's fine.
That's okay. I'm actually right at the end of this.
Brilliant.
So,
Just finish it, please.
yep, no worries. So for anybody who wants to ask me questions, you're more than welcome. I know it's probably a bit of a challenge for most people to kind of wrap their heads around this. So more than happy to answer questions. So kia ora, everybody. Thank you for listening. Um,
Thanks so much, Avril. That was really incredible. And I think we'll all share that idea of bringing the ancient knowledge and thinking through really important thought leadership going on there. Please, Giorgio, while we're doing this, can you get your slides up on the screen? Sorry, I'm a bit keeping us to time because I really want us to have a
No,
really
that's
lovely
fine.
conversation at the end. Thanks, everyone. I
That's
can see lots of
perfectly
applause going on
fine.
for you as well because yeah, it's such an important topic to bring to light and to bring that ancient knowledge back to a community that maybe hasn't seen it in a little while or isn't thinking about it in the contemporary time. Okay, and without
Yeah.
further ado, we're going to pass on to Giorgio. Yeah, please take it away.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? I hope so. Can you hear? Can you see? Can you do everything? Perfect.
Yes.
Hi. Okay, I'm Giorgio Scalici. I am an anthropologist, more or less. I used to work with the indigenous community in Indonesia. My career brought me back to Italy when I found the Italian network that studies, and when I had to find a new field of research. But I was working with minorities in Indonesia, so I decided, okay, I should work with minorities in Italy and see what this way is going to bring to me. And it's everything almost start with the COVID-19. This is not going to be a chapter, it's not a chapter on the COVID, but it's all start from there because we had the experience of COVID and it was a nightmare. It was terrible. We had all the funeral bans and we discovered the importance of funerals or to have like a good grieving process and it was terrible. We all suffered, but once the COVID ended, we all forget about it. We didn't learn much about the COVID, sadly, I will say, like as a government, as a community, and all of this. And it was all terrible. But the problem is that what was the COVID for us? I'm talking as a white Catholicish point of view, not migrant in Italy, was a terrible, like out of ordinary experience. But for religious minority in Italy, the COVID is a everyday life experience. Because for minority, the norms sucks in Italy at least. I sure not just in Italy, but it's terrible because all the issue with having traditional funerals for the minorities are like daily issues. In Italy, it's extremely hard to do traditional funeral that are not Catholics, and it's a topic and nobody talks about it. So I started to explore it. I went around Italy to do interviews, and now we're going to talk about what I discovered about that. But it's also start from this video. This is a small interview done during the COVID-19. So it's exceptional situation when like people that already have in the normal situation issues, the issue become way bigger. In Italy, nobody was talking about this. This is actually an interview for an international network, but in Italy, nobody care of discuss this.
As Italy struggles to cope with increasing numbers of coronavirus victims, Italian Muslims face a double challenge.
È nato un problema che per noi prima era minore, quello del trovare un cimitero islamico dove seppellire i nostri.
Italy only has 58 Muslim cemeteries across the country.
These things about 58, actually nobody knows the real number. I had like 58, 76, 100, 92, 120. They don't go beyond 140 possibly, but still.
And with the coronavirus outbreak, this shortage has become a big concern for the Muslim community.
Sono almeno 2 milioni di musulmani in Italia, sono distribuite diciamo nelle regioni nordiche maggiormente, ma come città spiccano Milano e Roma. In Italia ci sono 8.000 comuni, quindi pensate cosa voglia dire, diciamo 58 cimiteri su 8.000 comuni, vuol dire che c'è una carenza evidente per quanto riguarda questo.
Grim stories are circulating in the Italian press and on social media about Muslim families who are confined.
There were no cover on Italian press. This is the Muslim community press. It's not in the
at
national
home
one.
with the bodies of their loved ones.
diciamo, sospese in situazioni provvisorie senza delle certezze per quanto riguarda la loro sepoltura.
This family in Brescia, northern Italy, was able to bury their mother after spending a week in confinement with her body.
Ci tengo tanto a dire profondamente un grazie per tutte quelle persone che hanno contribuito a far sì che mia mamma venga sepolta dignitosamente in un cimitero islamico.
Muslim funeral agencies in Italy are overwhelmed with the increasing numbers of people dying.
Perché chiamata giorno e notte. Adesso non abbiamo più la morte normale, abbiamo tutti corona, il virus Covid-19. Viviamo malissimo, perché da una parte dobbiamo fare il nostro dovere e da un'altra parte abbiamo famiglia, anche noi abbiamo paura, molta paura. E quando entri proprio negli obitori vedi cosa che esci fuori con le lacrime, perché sicuramente.
Lei quante chiamate?
The video is longer, but this is just to give you an idea of how is the life of a minority. The Muslim one is very interesting in Italy during exceptional time, but we're going to see now the norm. The thing is that Europe, the destiny of Europe is to be a multicultural reality. This is the future, and there is an issue with democracy, and the idea is that funeral rights are human rights. And both the European Constitution, the Italian Constitution, they guarantee religious freedom in theory. In practice, it's not true at all. Italy actually has an amazing ranking on religious freedom, but the reality we're going to see is actually way terrible. It's the thing that is that we don't shoot people on the street, but beyond than that, being a minority in Italy is a nightmare. Of course, in Italy, when we talk about discrimination, we have to talk about the dynamic duo of fascism and Catholic Church. It all starts with the Paternal Lux in 1929, when the fascist government did this pact with the Vatican Church, when the Catholicism didn't become the national religion, but they got amazing rights, amazing. The interesting thing is that these are international pacts. So they cannot be changed if not both sides want to change it. Of course, the Vatican has no reason to change it. So from 1929, the Catholicism and the Vatican, they have rights that no other religion can have, can even dream in Italy. So we start for a base of discrimination. It's also interesting that in Italy, our funeral laws are from 1930, still from the fascists. They didn't change much. We had a small upgrade in 1990 and one in 2001, and that's it. So if you're not Catholic, you have other religion. And what's happened to this religion? You have two ways. First, to have an agreement with the government. And this is a complete list of religion having an agreement with the government in Italy. There are like 13. That is nothing. Islam is not one of those. Or you are not recognized by the state. So you have even less rights than these people. So we have three standards. The one that is just for Catholicism, religion who have an agreement, they're recognized, they can have like some tax break and some other service, and then you have all the others, including Islam, that is the biggest religious minority in Italy. So I went around Italy to do some interviews and to discover what was going on. And one interesting interview was with Maria Leotta, that she said important things regarding dead people in Italy. In Italy, dead people are considered like a common thing. It is a community things. As a living person, a dead person, you are still a matter of public policy. This is very nice on theory because the government it cares for you, it takes care of you, it protects you. But on practice, it creates a lot of issues if you want to do things differently than the norm. Again, our laws are from 1930, 1990, and 2001. So they are not being made for an intercultural reality like Italy now. So I interviewed with the Baha'i Association. They said like, yes, we have no space for our funeral. We have no time. We get no respect for the workers because they don't know us. Then I went to talk with the realism community. That is very interesting. Realism they believe in aliens and they believe that they are going to come back. The aliens will come back to the world. Then they use a piece of the bone to clonate us. And the thing is that you must conserve and preserve this piece of bone, but in Italy it's illegal. So we are banning them to be clonated in the future and to have like their heaven. Because in Italy, the corpse can be touched, you can separate, it's still a person. So, like if you cremate somebody and you bring the ashes at home, you have to inform the police. And the police must know all the time where the ashes are. And you can separate the ash. If you want to spread the ashes in the nature, it's very complex. It's depending by local laws because there are many, many, many laws about these things. Then, of course, open air cremation for Buddhists is a no, a big no. This is the only occasion that it happened, just because this person was a very important person, was a knight of the Republic, and he had a lot of political support. And they had to use the laws for pig fever to do it. But this is the only case. It never happened. Like it's the only things in 100 years possible. There was open cremation in Italy. And then, of course, you have like the scattering of the ashes that is not illegal, but very complex. You can do only in very specific places. And what's happening is that like she's a Sikh, and she told me like there are no dead sick people in Italy. The people die in Italy and they were shipped all in India. But I was born here. I'm Italian. I speak Italian. I don't want to go back to India when I die. I want to stay here. But how am I going to do it if the law they don't allow me to what I need to go to the afterlife? And of course, there was also things with the Muslim that is even more complex. And Bachu told me that is one representative told me like the thing is that I am first generation. I can hide things, but my children they're not going to hide. They're going to be Italian, and they're going to want the same rights. So the idea is that they leave Islam or they become extremist. And the things is that all minorities that I discuss with, and this is just a small portion, they have no trust in the government. So much so that the Muslim community is planning to have a Islamic cemetery that is going to cost 16 million of euros. That is impossible. It's just impossible. Because in the same interview, Bachu told me that every time you have to send somebody back to India, to Tunis, to Bangladesh, it's expensive. And they have to do a collect of money, and people start to hide for him because they don't want to give the money anymore. They can afford every time to pay like 5 euros, 10 euros. It's complex. I had a small call with the Tunis embassy in Palermo, and they told me like, we send back everybody. And the point for me is that once you die, you get sent back to your own country, that it shouldn't be your own country anymore. You should be Italians once you live in Italy for 20, 30, 40 years. And we are failing them as integration process and also like in the grieving process, how they can grieve properly without traditional funeral. The Italian government is destroying this community. They are going to be destroyed. People are going to live their own religion because they are not free to be themselves. And what struck me the most was that all of them, they have a very basic request. We want a space with no Catholic symbols. And this is almost impossible. You have to imagine that in Rome, capital of Italy, there is just one space for not Catholics. One space in the entire Rome. And in the south, the situation is even worse, and we are going to see this. And the striking things about this that the first Chinese funeral in Italy, there is a very racist comment that people do that, oh, you never saw a Chinese funeral. We actually never saw a Sikh funeral, Islam funeral. We don't saw funeral of minorities, but Chinese, everybody speaks about Chinese because believe that they swap each other. Oh, they do these terrible things. The fact is that Chinese go back to China when they're still alive. I call a friend of mine that is Chinese, and she told me like I never saw a Chinese funeral because they go back to China when they're still alive. And the first one was in 2014. 12 years ago. And we have a huge Chinese population, an old Chinese population, but it's so recent because there is no space, there's no service, there is nothing to do this. And this was in the north of Italy. And now we go to the final bit. In the interview, you were talking about Milan and Rome. All the interview that I did are from the northern Italy and central Italy. I just finished. So the problem is that with the minorities, there is another level situation with colonization, because Italy has this strange liminal place where we are a Western country, but not so much Western. At the same time, inside there are two Italies. There is a northern Italy is one country, and the southern Italy is another country. And these are three maps. The first one on the left is crematoria in Italy. You see they're all in the north. Sicily is the biggest island in the Mediterranean. They have 4 crematoria. White and red is the only place with Muslim funeral homes in Italy, all in the north. And that is the map of Italy before it was united in 1860. So the past situation of economic difference between North and South are still present in the afterlife, in all the death industry, and the impact of the life of minorities in Italy. It's all connected in some way. And I finish.
Thank you so much, Giorgio. That was really amazing. Really nice to flow on from Averil's talking about the body and the internal into the kind of legal frameworks. And Averil obviously touched on that. So we've got a really nice flow through for everyone. So yeah, would Sangeeta and Anga, can you start putting your slides up so we can get into the third talk, which is a really exciting kind of slight change in view where we're thinking really about the media and representations in the media that will hopefully flow through from these two presentations, from kind of the body into the kind of cultural legal setting into the kind of media frame. So yeah, I will pass over to you to get started on that. And also, apologies to Avril, because I think my alarm is not coming through on Zoom. It's got a filter potentially for the, yeah. So what I'll do is I'll just hold up the phone and hopefully you can see me holding the phone when it's
The problem is that your microphone is mute when you put the alarm.
No. I turned my microphone off mute, but it's Zoom that's filtering it out. So apologies for that. Yeah.
Yeah, are we good to go?
Yes, please. Please.
Yes. Sangeeta, take it.
Okay, so hello everyone. It's truly a pleasure to be here with you all today. So I'm Sanghita Dey and I'm currently a PhD scholar at Tejpur University. So first of all, my heartfelt congratulations to the editors and to all the contributors who have made this volume possible. So bringing together, such diverse intellectual engagements into one single publication is not a small task, of course. So it is quite truly wonderful to see it come to life. And in that process, I and my co-author both feel genuinely honored to be part of this collective effort. Now, Agnidh, next slide, please. Am I audible, Agnidh? Next slide.
Yes, you are audible, but wait, this is not moving for some reason. Just 1 second. Let me remove that. Yeah.
Okay, so now coming to our chapter, which is titled as Death and Colonial Hangover in the Vampire Diaries. So in this chapter, my co-author and I, we chose to work on the show, The Vampire Diaries, which is, we know, a very popular 8 seasons audiovisual fantasy series that many of us may have, watched quite casually. So well, this show has also been very, very popular in India, so much so that, it has been remade into 2 Hindi daily soaps, namely Pyar Ki Ye Kahani and Tere Ishq Mein Ghayal. So at that very first glance, so to speak, the series basically appears to be a popular teen supernatural drama, which is full of romance, rivalry, and fantasy. But we as researchers, we wanted to pause and ask that what is the series actually teaching us about death? Because as we know, in fantasy, death is never neutral. It is more stylized, aestheticized, and even moralized. So, more particularly, we wanted to know how does the series visually construct death across different species, like here in the case of humans, vampires, werewolves, witches, and hybrids. So, and also we wanted to see that whether all the deaths that are being represented, whether do they carry the same emotional and visual weight. And also, as we see the deaths of different supernatural characters, so we wanted to know that whether some deaths are framed as tragic and scared as well as mourned, or are they differentiated as normalized or redeemed and disposable. And in this process, actually, we began to notice and argue that these very distinctions are not accidental. They actually echo deeply rooted Eurocentric philosophical hierarchies, mainly ideas about civilization, purity, redemption, and monstrosity, which is basically, as we know, have colonial undertones. So, this is the point where the idea of a colonial hangover becomes very important in the discussion. Next slide, please. Here in this table, we have incorporated all the characters and their how they are differentiated as vampire and human turned vampire, and yes, as witches as well. Next slide, please, Agnidh. Okay. So we began asking that in what ways a Western psychoanalytic lens, particularly drawing from Carl Jung, that can help us analyze the depiction of death, dying, and bereavement in the series. And this particular concern, this led us to another important question, is that when such kind of a framework dominates, what happens to other cultural understandings of death? And also, does the series' way of showcasing mortality unintentionally marginalize Oriental perspectives on death and bereavement? So, these questions we tried to answer, and to unpack these concerns, we bring together the triple intersection of death studies, media studies, and colonial critique. And so to do so, we use Carl Jung's psychoanalytic framework, particularly his idea of archetypes, the shadow, individuation, and the collective unconsciousness. And this will be explained more by my co-author in his discussion further. So again, to say in precise, our chapter is therefore a very preliminary attempt to think towards how decolonizing the death studies in media, and we can how question whose deaths are actually dignified, whose are aestheticized, and whose are erased mainly. Okay, so next slide, please. So now, to ground these concerns further, we briefly establish a colonial metaphor within the series. So we are basically told that the first vampires, that is the originals, who are Elijah, Rebecca, and Klaus, they came from Eastern Europe to America to escape a plague, basically. So initially, they lived very peacefully among the locals. They coexisted, and even they remained very cautious about their surroundings. This particular thing, this closely resembles early colonial movements where, Europeans, as we know, they had arrived as traders and settlers before eventually consolidating power. That is the turning point where comes when they are transformed into vampires in the series. And while they are being transformed into vampires and they become vampires, Klaus, the originals, he, in his words, say they are transformed into predatory species. And humans here, in this case, become expendable. So we see here power shifting. Here, the explorers who had come to the ground as explorers, they are shifted or are transformed into becoming rulers. And interestingly, these vampires are created by witches like Esther and Ayanna. So, if we read witches as native elites in power, this becomes symbolically resonant. So, in many colonial contexts, as we know, including India, sections of the ruling classes enabled colonial structures. So power was not always seized from the outside alone, so to speak, it was also facilitated internally. So the witches are deeply tied and connected to nature. And another original called Rebecca, she even remarks in the series that witches are servants of nature while the vampires are abominations of it. So this particular point becomes important when we think about how colonial modernity, how it disrupted the grounds of indigenous nature based traditions. Next comes the werewolves, as we see. So, these werewolves, they can be read as tribal communities who are rooted in land and lineage. So, at one point, we learn that vampires hunted them nearly to the extinction. And when the viewers first encounter the werewolves in the series, we see them through the eyes of the vampires. So, we see them as dangerous, as strange, as antagonistic, because we are introduced to the vampires first in the series, and in that process we are encouraged to emphasize the vampires first. And as we do that, we see the werewolves from their eyes, we also try to empathize with them, and thus the werewolves become the other in the picture. So meanwhile, in the entire process, we also see humans existing within these power struggles, but rarely they shape them, and they are mostly presented as affected and politically marginal. So throughout this all mapping, that is the vampires as explorers, as we see explorers who are turned into colonizers, then witches as native elites, werewolves as resistant tribal communities, and humans who are seen as marginalized urban subjects, we begin to see how colonial hierarchies structure the entire universe of this show. So, with that framework, I would like to invite my co author Agnidh to take over this conversation into deeper discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, hello. Am I audible? Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Sangeeta, for establishing the premise of what we have talked about in our chapter, right? So now that we have looked at the metaphor of colonialism in this particular text per se, I can move on and talk about our analysis. So, according to the metaphor that Sangeeta talked about, the ideas of death are corresponding to those. When you look at vampire deaths, normal bullets cannot kill them in the show. They have to be killed by wooden bullets. That's a great commentary on how to push away the colonizer, you need native power. That is indigenous power, which is again rooted with nature, right? But then again, the death of a vampire is time-taking and the sight is not pretty. They desiccate, right? And we see that as a commentary on how the vampire is a figure who deserves our grief and who deserves our sympathy, for that matter, when that the character is dying. Other hands, other deaths, on the other hand, especially of humans such as Jeremy and Liz, they are absolutely erased. When you talk about witches and when you talk about werewolves, we at least see them dying. But when it comes to the humans dying, characters such as Jeremy and Elizabeth, it's funny almost that while Elizabeth was struggling with cancer, the show decided to focus on her daughter's love story growing with Stefan instead of showing her battle, instead of making the viewers feel sad for her. That's just such a clear commentary on how the human deaths just do not matter because the human in this instance does not matter, right? Then again, there is this idea that there is no finality of death in the Vampire Diaries. We in the beginning we grieved for the vampires, but we then very quickly realized that the primary characters somehow always come back to life. And then the pro at it is the character of Catherine. She we look at in terms of the trickster archetype of Carl Jung, who always creates trouble, and her character does create trouble in everyone else's lives, and she also treats death like a pro. But the bigger thing that we wanted to deal with in this particular point is that when the primary character comes back to life, he or she comes back with the same identity. there is the other side, and then there is hell and all these dimensions in the show. But when the characters are existing in those so-called areas, we call them liminal spaces in Carl Jung's terms. When they reside there and when they come back with the exact same clothing, the same hairdo, in fact, as when they died. That shows that they have retained their exact identity. And that is the European and the Christian biblical concept of death. Why is a person put in a coffin? Why do we wait till the day of judgment? Because so basically, we are retaining the identity of the person as what he is today on the day of his death. Whereas in the Indian Sanatani concept of death that we have, we believe in rebirth. We believe in the concept that the body dies, but the soul does not. So the soul takes a different packaging every time, right? So the moment I die in this particular lifetime, my soul will take another packaging, and that will be a different identity altogether. So we do not wait till the end of time for our judgment, right? So what happens in this sort of a concept is that we let go, because we have to let go of this particular identity, the identity of Agnidh Baruah for that matter. So we let go. That is our concept. We burn, we cremate, that is, we burn the body, and we put the ashes into a holy river, right? So that is all a practice of letting go, contrary to burying a person in a coffin, right? And we do not do gravestones because we do not remember that particular identity of that person in that particular lifetime, right? So that is the difference between the Indian Sanatani concept of death versus the European and Christian biblical concept of death, right? I already have discussed liminal space, but I would love to focus on the humans in the series. In the colonial metaphor, the humans have been seen as the natives of the colonized spaces who are not in the elite positions, whose voices do not matter. So the humans in the show, they pass on directly. So it shows that in all the so-called native spaces, all the traditional people, they do not have this concept of holding on to that particular identity of a person to wait till the day of judgment, right? We let go of our identity the moment the person dies in this particular life. Now, Jung and the self archetype in the show, so vampirism is also a form of death. A human has to die to become a vampire. There are certain conditions how does one become a vampire, but a vampire is basically a walking, talking, dead human, right? What happens when one becomes a vampire is that, yes, I see you, Stacey. Yeah. So, what happens when a human becomes a vampire is that the screen between his or her conscious and his or her unconscious, it dissolves. Both these worlds mix with each other, and the controlling of their impulses becomes very, very difficult, and that is when they start craving blood, right? And that is when they cannot control themselves with their bloodlust. Now, this unification of the conscious and the unconscious has already been looked at by Jung, and he has called it individuation. So we see that in this show, especially with the examples of Elena and Caroline, when they become vampires, they also become more truer versions of their self, right? Instead of just teenage girls going to school, they become a more unified versions of their self, right? And that's a beautiful way of showing Jung's self archetype and individuation, I feel. And finally, we work with the concept of Great Mother, and I will just end here, next is conclusion. The Great Mother is an archetype of Jung, wherein he says that it is a figure who gives life, and she is the only one who can take that life away. And there is this character of Esther, who is Elijah, Rebecca, and Klaus's mother, right? And she is the one who has the power to kill them. She is the one who has the power to end their lives. But then there is a problem with calling her the original witch. They call her the original witch in the series, but there is a problem with calling her the original witch because when she came to America from Eastern Europe with her family, witches already existed. She took help from other witches such as Ayana and all these other witches to create vampires, right? So if she is not the first witch in the world, how can she be called the original witch? This shows the colonial or imperial mindset of just, erasing the contributions of the people of the colonized lands to world history and to, to the world basically, to anything good that we have in this world, right? And calling everything ours and saying that all the contributions have been done by us, right? So that, as people coming from an erstwhile colonial land, that hit home, right? So this is the colonial angle in the Indian context, and with this, I conclude our presentation by saying that this work problematizes the subscription to colonial philosophies seen in the death representations in audiovisual media and talks about the need to recognize various cultures and various death perspectives. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was brilliant. Thank you both for that really insightful presentation. And again, I think we can all see the overlaps across the three presentations here. And yeah, thanks for everyone. Everyone's giving obviously applause and yeah. So I'll give everyone a couple of minutes to think about their questions, because hopefully we're going to have a really nice conversation. We've got another 25 minutes-ish. And in the meantime, I would love to, in the background, we've been doing some magic and figuring out who's our winner of our prize of a free copy of the book. And I'm really happy to announce that hopefully they're still on the call. The winner is Charlotte. Charlotte, are you on the call still? I don't know if you
Yes,
are.
I am.
Congratulations, you
Thank
won a
you
copy
very
of
much.
Decolonizing Death Studies.
I'm very excited. Thank you. It's been so
Brilliant.
interesting as well. Really interesting.
Thank you.
to
So
all the
please send
speakers.
me also your email address in the chat, and I'll get that copy to you as soon as I can. Right.
Thank you. That's lovely. What a nice start to the week.
Excellent. So yeah, if anyone would like to also open their camera and like give because we're obviously moving into the discussion part, and if anyone has a question, please start by raising your hand. Otherwise, I can start to draw some parallels across if people need another little bit of time to think about their questions. So yeah, I'll start with the question myself then while everyone gets warmed up. I'm really interested in the parallels across the three presentations around this idea of cremated ashes and what cremated ashes mean in these different social contexts. Obviously, Averil talked about the cremated ashes and that idea of what they mean in these different Maori, like ancient and contemporary concepts. Giorgio talked about the meaning of different types of burial, including, ashes within the Italian context. And obviously, Sanghita and Agnidh talked about the Indian idea of ashes versus body. And so I don't know if any of you want to come into that to start us off. That would be lovely. If you're thinking about drawing parallels across, or if you're thinking about a little bit more information about that. Yeah, Giorgio, please.
Hi. For me, just clarification, because it can be strange from other culture, but in Italy, cremation it's seen as a very political choice. All the cremation movement is almost like anti-Catholic movement, almost like it's like, oh, we want a more like it seems a kind of a no religious, and is strongly linked with fight for rights of being free to choose to have something different than not the majority of Catholics. And it's interesting to see the connection between this idea, because at the end is the thing that religious minority and no religious minority, they have the same issues, because having space for not Catholic rituals that are religious or no religious is very tricky in Italy. So then all this community come together, and is a general request for rights of actually true freedom of choice of how you want to die and what you want your funeral to be.
If I can just come in here. So, the very thing that you mentioned about, about going against the Catholic idea, right? So, they could have done anything else, right? Just choosing cremation, I think, puts out this statement that there is that other culture in the world, which is not the culture of the centralized Europe, which is not the culture of the powers that colonized more than half of the world, right? And I think it is then that we all of us, the other culture per se, in terms of colonialism, in terms of, let's say, Said and Baba, the other culture, we have to see that is the culture of cremation across nations, in New Zealand, in Australia, in India, in Indonesia, in Sri Lanka. Everywhere we have this culture of cremation. And where does it come from? I think it comes from what we just talked about, the Sanatani sort of an idea, which can be, of course, known by different names in different places. The entire idea of letting go, not holding on to that particular identity, not waiting for the day of the judgment, right? You live this life, and then this body of yours dies, that is, this packaging dies, and this particular identity is done and dusted, right? You do not carry that baggage to the next life. uh, that is a whole new identity, right? And to to start that off, you need to first dispose this well, right? Because without disposing it, without having a proper finish to it, you cannot start something neatly. So in that sense, I think there is this whole concept of cremation, of burning, of disposing of the ashes in a respected manner, right? And I think that's beautiful,
Yeah.
personally.
Let's pass it to Avril then to hear what she has to
Yeah.
say.
This, sitting here thinking about it and hearing what you're saying. In terms of choice of disposition, there is very much a strong hold that Eurocentric views have over death and dying and disposition, and cremation is one of those as well. But for me, cremation is quite a pragmatic response. And one of the things for cremation to occur is you need fuel. If you don't have fuel in which to burn a body, and it takes quite a lot of fuel to burn a body, then what do you do with them? And I think about places where the water table is high, or where we have islands in the Pacific that are about to be inundated by oceans. So you can't go downwards with which to get rid of a body, and you can only go so far upwards to entomb a body. But if the island itself is in threat of inundation, what do you do? Cremation offers an option, or at-sea burial offers an option. So in terms of choice of disposition, there are choices, but some of those choices are made by what you have access to. In terms of policy, public policy, from my experience of New Zealand and of Australia so far, it has been wherever Christianity has touched, its policies follow suit. And although there is diversity of disposition method here, it is still very much not operated, but it's certainly influenced by Catholicism and Christianity in general. In New Zealand, even though it's gone through this process, it is still developing its policies in New Zealand about cremation, and particularly for Indian people who want to cremate in open pyres, is actually seriously looking at how can we do that? Is that even a possibility? How do you do that environmentally? So I can see the parallels, and I can see the policies, and I can see how you feel as though you were given a choice. And I was reading Giorgio's work where the law allows for it, but the practical application of it is actually quite restrictive. And for Māori, that we have a culture that has been impacted so much that we've forgotten. And cremation has actually occurred in New Zealand for 800 years since Māori has been there, maybe longer. But it has been forgotten. So what happens when we do that?
Thanks, Avril. That's such a good provocation, I think, for all of us to think culturally and embeddedly, like what happens when these knowledges have been forgotten. And I'm opening up the conversation to the audience. I don't know if anyone in the audience has something that they'd like to add to this, any thoughts, comments, any thoughts for the speakers. Otherwise, I'll see if Sanghita wants to jump in on this conversation, or maybe one of the speakers wants to ask each other a question as well. Do you have anything to add to this discussion on different forms of disposition? Sangeeta, maybe?
I'm just thinking about it.
Okay, that's fine. One of the other parallels I think that was quite interesting was also what you're talking about, Avril, maybe we've got someone in the chat saying, oh no, someone's saying they have to leave. Okay, thank you very much for coming. That was lovely. But yeah, one of the other parallels that I'm thinking about is, I guess, this legal framework that is touched on in some of the presentations. So this idea of how do we have a multicultural society, or how do we escape some of those Western ideas that have infiltrated our culture in ways that allow us to move forward into this contemporary time. So we see that obviously in Averill's presentation at the beginning, with the idea of, even the terminology for the body being Christianized, and the way that the law is still sort of catching up, or society's catching up on this. We see that in Giorgio's thinking about the Italian law and how it's so unprepared for being open, despite being in the European Union, which claims to frame this as an open thing. And then we see it in the Vampire Diaries, that kind of cross-colonial contamination, where you're thinking about how this piece of media has been produced, and then how it's coming back into the Indian community, and then being transformed into kind of more local shows that perhaps are that's another question, actually. Sorry, the other question we can put on the table, but Angad and Sanghita, is that, what do you think about the Indian productions of the show? Do they have the same kind of colonialism embedded in them, or are they different in any way to the original Vampire Diaries?
Would you like to go first, Sangeeta, and I can jump in? Yeah. Are you there, Sangeeta? Hello?
Don't know if her screen is frozen, perhaps.
Oh, okay, okay, there might be some issue. All right, all right. Okay, so the two daily soaps that have been produced based on the Vampire Diaries, we do not claim to have watched each and every episode. They are like quite long.
Oh gosh, maybe some
And,
Wi-Fi.
but yes, of course, uh, Indianizing it, if it makes sense. I get frozen. Everyone seems frozen to me. Hello.
Hi, I can hear you again, I think. Sorry.
Yeah? Okay. No, just a moment ago, all of you seemed frozen to me, so I thought there must be a problem on my end. Yeah. Anyway, so the shows, Indian daily soaps, right? We do not claim to have watched each and every episode of it, but then bits and pieces of it here and there. And they have tried to make it with parallels from the Vampire Diaries by Indianizing it, in the sense where you have witches. Here in the show, we have, let's say, we have tantrics, right? Who deal with the Indian. I don't know whether you know the concept of a mantra.
Please
So they
explain
are
it.
basically incantations. Yeah, mantras are incantations. Yeah. So they do all of that. But when it comes to the death, right? When it comes to the death, when a human dies in this Indian show, it's of course they are cremated, they are burnt, whatever. When a vampire dies, so vampire, first of all, the way they have portrayed it, they could not perfectly Indianize it. We have to understand that, right? So they could not perfectly Indianize it. So they have taken inspiration from the American vampire concept, right? And so when they die pretty similar to how Stephen Damon, these characters die in the Vampire Diaries, right? So that does seem like a bit of what do you call it? Like a conundrum, if I might. The show seems Indian, but also not Indian. Kind of, the death of the vampire looks confusing at a point. But then again, um, it's not only about what happens to the corpse after that he or she has died, or whether we burn it, whether we put it in a coffin. It's not only about that, it's also about the process of dying that we have also talked about in our presentation. In the Vampire Diaries, whenever a vampire dies, the process in itself inspires grief in you, right? And that is the treatment that they get. On the other hand, when Sheriff Elizabeth Forbes died, like I said, it was borderline funny, right? She is battling with cancer, and here the viewers are watching Caroline's love story with Stefan going somewhere, right? So that's the level of erasure that we had. So this
Yeah,
particular
yeah.
process of dying has not much been dealt with in the Indian shows. They have kept it safe. They have kept it more or less safe,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Maybe because the Indian mind somewhere cannot comprehend that level of differentiation between these characters because maybe they are not thinking from the colonial point of view. Maybe they,
Yes.
yeah.
It
So,
would be interesting to have a kind of speculative project where you like redesigned the show. That would be quite
yes, of course,
interesting.
of course. Like we would,
Yeah.
yeah, for future research, we would love to take those Indian daily soaps as the primary text and
Yeah.
refer to TVT and, look at how the Indian production differs, right? So, so
So
that is that, I
there are
feel.
quite a few questions now appearing in the chat, and we've also got one
So,
in the room.
if I may just add up to the conversation that my co-author just added. So the thing is like the concept of aging, if we come to see in how that has been dealt in TVD. So in comparison to that, how the things have been dealt with in the Hindi daily soaps that we got to see in India. So the thing is like the particular character of which we see in TVD, this is mostly dealt with all sort of ages, like from young to old age we see witches. But in India, the stereotypical concept of the tantric, quote unquote, that Agnid mentioned about, this is typically a very old woman or of old man being represented. So this concept is quite embedded, how the aging process can be seen in both the discussions of TVD as well as Indian Hindi daily soaps. So that can also be explored in further researches also.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sangeeta. So I'm going to go to a couple of the questions from the chat, and then I'll go to Banioti's question as well after that. So Shannon has a question for all three presenters. Cost was discussed in various ways. What is the role of cost in the notion of freedom of choice? And is there a historical comparison for this? For example, in the past, how did an inability to pay for traditional funeral rituals impact access to those rituals? And I wonder whether Avril wants to go into this one first, yeah?
Yep, I can do that. So I guess one of the fundamental things for Māoridom is that it is a community-based society. So if you would tend to pool resources, so people still had access regardless of whether you were broke or whether you were the chief of this entire iwi. It didn't really matter. The extent to which people would come and visit was a matter of mana. Now, mana is something that's really hard to describe in a really short space of time, but it's like a currency. So there's three different layers of it, and your entire tribal mana would be at risk if you could not provide for visitors. And so this whole thing goes on. So as an entire social thing, it would be important to bury the dead because they are your ancestors. You have an obligation to them as ancestors. So historically, you would get a collective type of response. And even now, with the shift to individuality and individualism, which is made by, financial institutions and by funeral directors, somebody has to sign the dotted line to pay. And even though that happens, we still act as a collective. Family and whānau will give money, and they will give what they have, whether that's food, whether that's places for people to sleep, whether it's transport. It will be something that they can help with, and communication between family members, and even beyond that towards extended family, which includes friends. That happens, and that's fairly normal for New Zealand. It's fairly normal here, even in Australia and amongst Māori communities, Pacific Island communities, it's very much the same. But if a more modern concept of that is when you can't pay or when your family can't pay, then they're signing bodies over to the state so that there is a state funeral or a state, well, it's not even a funeral, it's just a state burial and disposition in some cases where if they've left instructions here in Australia, they can be buried or they can be cremated. And if the state pays, then you lose control of that process altogether.
Yeah,
So
brilliant. Thank you, Averil.
there's ups and downs to both, but as far as our community is concerned, it would be probably the biggest shame on us all if we let somebody die and not be buried or to be returned to their family as they should.
Yeah, I
I
think
hope
this
that helps. I hope that
yeah,
helps a little, Shannon.
I think so. At least I don't know what Shannon thinks, but yeah, I think this idea of collectivism is a really lovely thing to bring to the table now and to think about what that means in relation to, I guess, capitalism. And the next question really relates to that. Swati is talking about, I found the idea of the hierarchy in the treatment of the dead as discussed in the last presentation very, very interesting. Sorry, I joined late. I don't know if the other speakers have already discussed it. So I think that the hierarchy and the idea of hierarchy speaks to all the presentations. I mean, Avril just talked about it now in relation to the Māori experience and how they experience contemporary capitalism. And I think Giorgio's presentation also was really talking about hierarchies in Italian society and the fact that the church, even though we've got this huge population of Muslim people living in Italy, they are not given the same rights, death rights, human rights, as Giorgio rightly put out, as other people living there. So I don't know if you want to come in on that, Giorgio, and then we can pass it to Sanghita and Agnidh to comment on to the hierarchies particularly.
Yes, in Italy it's pretty clear, and the interesting part is that, like, I don't believe that Italy is a Catholic country as a religion. We are a Catholic. I'm not, but we are a Catholic country as a tradition. We're used to be, and we have this inertia, but all the political system and the legal system is strictly linked to the presence of the Catholicism in Italy for like centuries. So the default situation is that the entire system is not made for not Catholic people. So we have a great discussion when it was with abortion, with still now in 2025, 2026 with the after the pill. Legally in Italy, a doctor don't give it to you because it's against his own religion. So no, I'm not going to give you a pill that is your right, but I can't do it. So for sure there is a clear hierarchy of first-class citizen and second-class citizen and third-class citizen and so on. And then if we interview, like, there are more things because, like, Buddhists, they're white, middle, high-class Italian people. So yes, they are religious minorities, but they are not migrants and they are not like other kind of minorities. while like Muslim or Sikh or other kind, like they have more issues because there are migrants, there are religious minorities, they are like visible. Like one issue with the Sikh, they told me that for many children it's very hard because they are clearly different for religious reason, like the turban, and they suffer a lot. They get bullied at school. So for sure there is a lot of hierarchy going on which kind of citizen we have the government want to support and all this kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
if I can briefly connect with, there is another question that is connect with this, if I can.
Sure. Is there another one in the chat, you mean?
Yes, because there
Yes,
is
please
one
do.
question
Yeah.
about what we can do to change it. If I read it before, was something like um, it
What
was
does the panel think about how we can appeal to those in charge of politics
exactly.
to help make changes? Have you seen any changes recently?
Yes, I didn't see any changes. Actually, there is. I was talking before the cremation society, all the cremation things, but there is a Italian cremation society. There is an entire political movement with that. And I talk with the funeral homes, the Italian Association of Funeral Homes, all this kind of stuff. And they are years they are fighting for new laws because they have a lot of issues with these laws. But they're like, we have no political power because nobody cares about all this kind of stuff and our like industry, the funeral industry. So we're trying to propose new laws, but nobody listens to us. There is this. You have to admit that in general, all the funeral things in Italy is at the bottom. Like in Palermo, my hometown, if you are a worker of the government and you must be punished, you get sent to the cemetery office. That is considered punishment. So there is
Yes.
no recognition of the importance of all these things related to death and funeral.
So we're sorry. I know the conversation is getting really good now, and as always, when the conversation gets good, we're coming towards the end of our time. So we've got two more questions in the chat and Baniotis in the thing. So what I would say is we'll take all the questions, and if anyone wants to give any final comments, we can just do final comments. So Ghislaine says that I was wondering if the last panel identified any differences in grief narratives on TVD deaths. As from what I remember, the main human deaths had shown more bereavement and mourning practices, such as funeral rites, that lasted longer to the dynamics between characters. Jim asks, looking at after spiritual and bereavement services in palliative and aged care as a pluralist, I find myself coming up against certain ontological and epistemological superiorities that remain mostly visible. Our systems are founded on assumptions, and people do not have knowledge of reflective skills to acknowledge their positionality. I feel their education needs to start here. Any thoughts? Really important questions. And Baniotis, do you want to just give your question in, and then we'll do just a final comments?
No, I think out of respect, I
Gonna
get
leave
my
it.
hand up. I'm gonna recuse my question, but congratulations to all the speakers. I've had the chance to read the chapters anyway, so over to the other questions.
So yeah, any final comments from any of the speakers, please jump in.
If I may,
Yeah,
I
please.
would just like to address Ghislaine Moti's question, like just in 2 minutes, I guess. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for that question, Ms. Ghislaine. I see how you might have that, doubt, or how you might have that skepticism towards our argument. But then you also have to realize that showing more mourning or more bereavement for the human deaths is also a very practical thing, right? When Jeremy dies or when Elizabeth Forbes dies, everyone in the town knows them. They are normal human beings. Everyone will be sad, right? And they are the people whose corpses can be presented to the town, not the vampire corpses, because they look something different. The people cannot be shown that corpse for the human deaths. But then again, we as scholars of literature and cultural studies, we look more into the subtext of it, right? So when we talk about death, we also look at the aesthetic of death. So we look at a lot many factors which either inspire grief in us or which doesn't. And by us, we do not mean the characters in this on the screen, we mean cancer, mind you. And Caroline also tries to make her better, but she ends up making her worse. But even then, she lies in her coffin. She looks absolutely peaceful. She looks flawless. Her skin looks flawless. Her body looks flawless, right? So, going from the angle of the aesthetics of death, that does not really inspire a lot of grief in the viewers. So, the sort of grief that a vampire death evokes in us, right? So we do have to look at the subtext, and we have to look at what is that portrayal, or not only the storyline, but also the subtext, and what is that portrayal doing to us, the viewers, rather than to the people in the screen, because they are part of the storyline any which way, right? So that is that. And with that, I think, yes, thank you so much, Stacey, for moderating this really beautiful session. We loved listening to Averil. We loved listening to this fine gentleman talking about the Italian context, right? We, as people working in the domain of death studies, and especially in decolonizing death studies, coming from an erstwhile colonized area, I think we have gotten a lot of a lot of perspectives, and also the most beautiful perspective would be of how similar a lot of our sentiments are from across the globe, and how similar a lot of our arguments are from across the globe. And I think that really brings us all together in this exercise of decolonizing death studies. And I think that's the greatest takeaway. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Angha. That's a brilliant way to help us end the session. And I really appreciate you helping us do the roundup there. Like, thank you so much for the audience who attended. Thank you so much for all your questions. We've loved bringing this to the community. And remember, there are 2 more webinars that you can come to if you want to continue this conversation on. And I'm sure the speakers would love to hear from you as well. So if you have any more questions for our lovely panel of speakers, please do. And obviously, there's the book as well if you fancy reading and getting a bit more depth on these chapters and these questions. Yeah, I really appreciate us coming together as a community. And yeah, I'll draw this session to a close. And thank you again to our brilliant speaker panel. You were all truly brilliant at giving us this deeper and varied perspective.
Thank you. It's been
All right,
wonderful
I
with
would just love
everybody.
to say that once people read the book and read our chapters, we are open to receiving mail communications. We are open to receiving questions and observations from across the globe, right? And we are open to having our horizons broadened. So please come at us, right? Our contact details are all in the book.
Brilliant. Well, have a good day, everyone. Look forward to seeing you soon. And yeah, lovely to see you all today. Bye bye.